In this episode of the Smart Community Podcast, I have a great conversation with Adam Davis. Adam is the director of TPL Connect, and TPL Connect are actually our sponsor for the month of November in 2020, which we're super excited about. Now, you may remember Adam from episode 90, which is over 100 episodes ago, where we talked about starting with the foundations. Now, in this episode, Adam and I discuss his background and his passion for delivering real results in the smart city space and not just tech for tech's sake. Adam shares with us learnings from a number of projects he's been working on, as well as sharing some of the challenges that companies and governments are facing when it comes to IoT and implementation of smart community projects. We talk a lot about use cases and enabling thinking and enabling technology and the art of the possible. And Adam shares with us some of the projects he's currently working on with his team. We finish our chat talking about emerging trends in understanding the baseline and having measurable impact. And then Adam shares with us some of his favorite ways to learn about what's happening in this space, including from local government. As always, we hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
Welcome to the smart community, smart regions, smart towns, and smart cities. It's where we live, work, and play. With smart communities, the future starts today. Big data, smart mobility, emerging trends galore. The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.
This episode was brought to you by our sponsors, TPL Connect. TPL Connect are specialists in the design and delivery of smart city and IoT technology projects, offering consulting, design, and project management services. Their strength is their ability to deliver your project vision and not a compromised one. They do this by working with you in the early stages of feasibility to detail your project vision, objectives, requirements, and scope. Then work with you to deliver the project through to completion and handover. Their team take the stress out of designing and delivering technically difficult projects by working on your behalf to deliver the original requirements and objectives of the project. TPL Connect, your project vision delivered. Hello, Adam. How are you today?
Hey, Zoe. Very well. Thank you for having me back on.
Thanks so much for coming onto the podcast again. And I was just having a look. You were episode 90, which we are at episode 190. I'm going to say the wrong one, but 195, I think, at the moment. So like over 100 episodes ago, which, yeah, it was really exciting, touching base again with you. And I'm really excited to have you on board. I was just going to say our last episode was called Starting with Smart Foundations. Mm-hmm. And I remember the conversation now when I was having a look back, and it was a really important one because we really need to build on those for this smart space. So really keen for you to come back on, and yeah, we're going to dive straight in. So tell us a little bit about your background and what you're passionate about.
Cool. First up, congrats on the 100,000 downloads too. That's awesome. So has been a while. A bit about me. I'm Adam Davis. I'm Managing Director of TPL Connect. We're a specialist technology design consultancy group that design and deliver technology projects, not least of which in smart cities and IoT. Been around since 2011, and the business has seen steady growth over the past few years and even through the recent challenging times that we've all been facing. Certainly been some pivots for the business around the types of projects that we're working on at the moment and the types of projects that we're actually seeing getting stood up as opposed to the ones that we forecasted earlier this year. But still, it's good to see that the industry seems to be holding together there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, it has been interesting to see the things that have kind of been doubled down on and the things that are like, okay, we'll do that later, which has been, fascinating. And you would have seen a lot in the work that you do.
Yeah, it was very interesting. I think as March started to unfold as to where we thought we saw the market going this year as to where it ended up and, seeing projects that we had thought were certainties, whether we were involved in or not with COVID, just simply vaporizing, university projects, new builds, things like that, just gone, not even on hold, just completely gone. So, yeah, there was a bit of a shift and a pivot for us early in the year. But you're right, Zoe, the shift has been interesting because we're seeing a lot of audit-style works going on at the moment and a lot of preparation for other types of projects. So that's current state analysis of where people are at so they can take that next step and enable the projects that they've been looking to do. So that's what we're sort of seeing at the moment. It's a lot of that, and also seeing projects really start to come to fruition that have been talked about for some time. Certainly in the smart city space, we're past that hype curve, I think, and we're actually seeing implementation phase now of a lot of these types of projects. But still seeing some of the usual challenges around the front end of that stuff not being done correctly, and working on the actual project vision and the objectives and things like that, and undertaking technology for technology's sake is still a concern in this industry.
Mm-hmm. Now, tell us what you're passionate about first.
I'm passionate about delivering technology projects for clients that actually meet the vision that they've set out to achieve. I think, too often we see clients, or we're seeing projects in the past that have been delivered and handed over. It looks nothing like the original intent, and that can be through a myriad of different reasons, right? But I think doing that work up front that a lot of people try and skip as we try to rush through these projects all the time, actually defining your objective and getting the big one for us is where we see it fall over is not defining the project requirements. So, flushing them out from a business level and then, functionality and technology level, and actually getting those right, because that enables you to hold the entire project to account through all the phases, and certainly through whatever form of testing you do at handover, whether that's user acceptance testing, commissioning, or whatever phase you do go through, if you go through all of them. It's really important to be able to hold that project to account and the product that is delivered from something that was decided on and agreed on early on in the piece as the scope and the requirements.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so important, and something I've had a lot of conversations about with numerous people on the podcast is it's all well and good to have an idea, but to actually implement that, you need to go through this kind of, standard process. And yes, it's innovation, and yes, it's technology, and yes, it's exciting. But actually, there's some really fundamentals that are not super exciting. They're basic project management skills.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
And I think it'd be an interesting question back to you, Zoe, because this is more the front end style where we don't really specialise as much in that, you've got a client that's got a prospective project on the books, and what we've seen a lot of is they've defined the project around a technology, and you just said before, they've got a cool technology or something like that they want to implement, but they really haven't rationalised the why. Why do we need to do this, and does this align to the overall vision of the council or whatever it is, and the initiatives that the region's trying to achieve? And that's been a bit of a shortfall that we've seen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I talk about a lot of defining the pain points of the community. And that's if it's a community project, right? I mean, I think all the smart community projects, smart city projects should eventually, benefit is the word, benefit the community. However, some of these won't necessarily be pain points that the community is necessarily feeling right now. They might be internal to a local government, for example. But really defining those, you're exactly right. It's not, how do we implement this new technology that we've found that someone else implemented? It's going, well, that's a really cool idea, but actually, let's put that over to the side for a second and actually come back to, what are we trying to do here? And can we do it through different ways?
Exactly. We have done a little bit of work at that front end in the past, working with councils especially, and the easiest way to flesh those out, we found, is just look for what the promises were that the mayor was voted in on. What problems was he looking to fix in the region? What had been identified by a lot of research normally when you're running for council into what the regional pain points are. You're exactly right. So what are those problems, and how can we utilise technology to actually help fix those problems? And, it's also been beneficial for consultancies like us. We've worked with 2 councils now that we've just sat down with and said, what are your top 3 problems at the moment? Let's forget technology. Let's forget about smart cities tags or whatever we need to put on this. What are your top 3 problems? And just working with them to flush those out. And then we just internalise those and, talk to the vendor partners that we've worked with over the years, any of the specialist consultants that we've worked with, and say, what is coming through that could help fix these types of problems? And that's been a really sort of refreshing angle, and particularly the vendors love it, because all the products that they're working on and have been for some time, you're bringing them the problem that their solution actually fixes. And, then there's a value back to the council and the client then, because they can see that you've actually just taken that problem, taken it away and come back with a potential solution.
Yeah, no, totally. I think which sounds maybe a bit woo-woo to some people, but it's actually a mindset. It's a mindset shift. And like a lot of the time it might not be a technology, or it might be technology is only part of the solution, but actually it's a shift in communication, a shift in how we operate, how we think about, what's possible. Because I think sometimes, particularly in, say, regional local council, where resources are scarce, time is scarce. Well, actually, time is probably abundant, but everything else is really scarce. Dollars, skill sets. And I think it's just we accept, certain things the way that they are. And I think if we start thinking a bit differently about what is possible, and obviously not everything is going to be possible right now, but I bet some of the technology that you're working with or the vendors you're working with, it's not necessarily new, advanced, we're waiting on this really high-tech thing to solve our problem. It's actually stuff that's available right now.
Yeah, a lot of it, it's like they're repurposing existing technologies for new problems. A good example of that might be, we're doing a bit of work at the moment. We've done projects in the past in the aged care space, and that shift that we're seeing in aged care at the moment to at-home care, the technologies that we utilise in aged care facilities are, critical in safety, and they're paramount around reporting and ensuring that everyone's safe and healthy. So how do we take those technologies and look to utilise them in home care situations? So, that's been an interesting one that we're working with a couple of clients on, around how do we take those technologies and have them as a distributed architecture as opposed to a centralised one inside an aged care facility. And it just takes the technology and flips it on its head. And you need different ways to interact with it. You need different ways to be able to report on it, and different functionality sometimes. But the overarching technology is pretty much the same.
And I guess it's then thinking about the user, right, of what it, that might completely change, even though you're dealing with the same maybe customer or patient or person at the other end, actually how that person interacts with it will be completely different based on those circumstances as well.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, let's roll back a little bit and go to what sparked your interest in this space?
A number of things, I think. Originally my background is network technician by trade, and worked through project management and design, and then into distribution of products, and working with the last couple of companies before I started my business. It was at the fledgling stage 9 years ago of smart cities and IoT. And back to our discussion around the first time I was on your podcast there, Zoe, was the underlying infrastructure. And we were doing a lot of work with councils at that point in time around building up the network to support the technologies that will sit on top of it. So at the time it was with a fibre optics company. So really looking at enabling them to be able to have a good infrastructure to support the technologies. From there, my interest just sparked because I live on the Sunshine Coast. I'm very lucky to live up here. And we have a fantastic council that's very active in that space, as I'm sure we're all pretty aware here as we go for our second time round in the top 7. And working with the council up here on a number of initiatives and projects over the years, once I started my business, was also unbelievably exciting. We got to see some really cool projects. We were doing some designs that other councils wanted to do, but didn't have the funding or the capability at the time to do. So, yeah, my interest sparked, I think, originally back in the infrastructure days of the passive side, so structured cabling into wireless, and where that led to devices and connectivity and use cases for what you can actually do with all that. So I think that's probably where my interest in smart cities and IoT really stemmed from.
And let's go to a bit of we've talked a little bit about the use cases actually, and I think use cases are super important. So thanks for using that word, particularly because I think sometimes we forget about actually fleshing out those use cases first. Like, what is this going to be used for? Which sounds completely obvious, but I think sometimes it's kind of like we have a grand vision of all these things that are going to happen, but we don't actually think about, well, how is this going to be used? Who is it going to be used by? Et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Probably the most extreme example of that we've worked on in the recent past is, I won't get too detailed on this one, but it was overseas in the UAE. There was a very large development project happening over there. It's UAE, it's situation normal for them. But as part of the overall services package, there was an IoT component to the project, which we were successful in working on. However, our scope of works was a paragraph. So it was certainly a challenge. Yeah, it's not least of which is the cultural differences, but then you start to look at what do you actually believe IoT to be, because I think there's a misconception around what IoT actually is. And, you know, people may be using the term a little bit loosely, certainly in buildings. You know, I think there's a lot of capability that systems like BMSs and controls are already doing that we're now just calling IoT, which is fine as we connect all these extra devices and put the smarts behind it and the analytics. I think it's very important. But yeah, again, you know, we worked with that client for some time just to try and define a scope and never actually got there. So what we did was we took the project vision and we built out a day in the life user experience. So that use case again of the top 5 people we would see using the precinct. So we had contractors, VIPs, executives, visitors, so on and so forth, and what their day may look like in interacting with the precinct, whether they're going to work or going there to see a show or a sporting event, whatever that might be, and listing out all these. And I heard a great term the other day, the art of the possible, listing out what we could potentially do from a technology standpoint as a user experience, not as a technology. Trying to explain to the client that we didn't want to talk about technologies. We wanted to talk about that user experience, and all of the technologies will fall out way down the track once we've built those out and discuss what the experience is like, and then we can build out requirements and get down to the technology at a later date. But we're seeing that a lot. You know, we work with Telstra as well. We're a Telstra partner, and they've seen a lot of that as well around clients coming to them for guidance on IoT and smart cities, but not really having any understanding of why. It's just simply a case of, we want to do something with IoT. Okay, great. What for? What are you trying to achieve here? What are you trying to fix? And not really having that understanding. So I think, yeah, there's some challenges there in the industry that just even understanding what the industry is sometimes is difficult.
Yes, on that point, let's go to what is a smart community to you?
A smart community, I think, is one that is enhanced by the use of technology, but for making better decisions is always the part, right? Utilising the data, utilising the analytics to make better informed decisions and creating a smarter, you know, there's a million different terms we could put on this, but certainly a smarter community is the outcome. And the ideal objective for me in a smart community would be that you actually don't know that you're interacting with any of the technology. That's it. That's when it's being done really well. I think that's when you've succeeded, if you've implemented a smart strategy, whatever that might be and however that might look.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And it's something I talk about when I was in South Korea, for example. It wasn't like people were like, oh, well, why is it a smart city?
Yeah.
That's the term back then. And there are some use cases that maybe we wouldn't be comfortable with in Australia. And I think that's something we need to identify. But for me, when I was there, I felt like I was in a smart city because I didn't need to think about how I was interacting with the city. So I could catch my public transport through an app. There was ultra fast internet wherever I went, which I missed greatly when I came back to Australia. But it was just easy to get around. And even with the barrier, the language barrier, because it's quite a strong language barrier, to be honest. But Koreans also will look out for you. If you look like you're confused, they'll try and help you, even if they don't speak a word of English, which is beautiful. And I love that. They're like, oh, which way do you want to go? Like,
yeah, fantastic.
But in saying that, I think for smart communities, it's a feeling of being included in the community. It's a feeling of community, a sense of community. And I think when we interact with technology in the future, we may not know exactly what it is. But I think what we will know is we'll understand why it's the case, and we'll also feel a sense of what I think we're winning if we trust the technology to be doing public good, that we're working towards public good, which I think is really important. And I think it's going to be a really interesting time moving forward as to how we achieve that in our different communities.
Yeah. Yeah. Trust is an interesting discussion, isn't it? You know, around interacting with technologies, and especially at the moment, you know, we only have to look to the COVID app, right? And the take up of that nationally as to how much trust we have with our own data, with our own government. You know, that is a questionable part of this overarching smart city strategy and smart communities. It's building that trust and creating that ongoing level of trust to utilise people's data.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we'll start to have more and more conversations about it. And I think it will become more and more mainstream, which, will have interesting, I say interesting a lot, but it's kind of like there'll be good things and bad things that come from both of that discussion. But I'm hoping what it will do is move us forward so then we can actually start having, I guess, these more really tangible things that we were, I guess, talking about earlier, where we have these use cases and it's like, oh, I understand that I'm exchanging my data for this level of service. And I trust the other end that this is what and I know what they're going to use my data for because that's really transparent. Maybe I don't understand absolutely everything, the ins and outs, but I know that, these are the things that I can expect. And these are the things that I shouldn't expect. And if these happen, then that's not okay. And I know what to do about that. So I think, it's going to be really interesting, and particularly people that aren't necessarily super high tech, right?
Yeah.
It should be easily understandable. And I think that will be a real shift, a real change. And I think that will be moving us in a direction where we can start to have, and, one of the reasons I started the podcast is to open up these conversations and start having these and making them more accessible for everybody.
Yeah. Actually, I saw an article today where it was that the Australian government is implementing a digital online platform for international travellers coming into the country that can register online as they come through and where they're going, and then some form of tracking as well for traceability for COVID. So, again, back to that enabler that is our friendly pandemic that's getting around at the moment, that's enabled some projects that I think we've talked about for a very long time. And now we've just been pushed into a corner to have to do it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's going to be a lot of use cases like that. And I think starting to ask those questions of, what does that mean and what does that mean for the future as well? Because right now we might accept certain things, but maybe in the future we won't. So, I think it will be really fascinating. I love working in this space because it's always new every day. But also there's these foundations that we were talking about earlier that aren't changing dramatically anytime soon. So we really need to understand those so then we can build upon those.
Yeah. When you were talking there before about what is a smart city, have you seen I think it's Frost and Sullivan have a definition, and there's 9 critical components that you must have to have a smart city. And one of them is, number 9 is smart citizens. So, it's a very interesting take on it. That's, I'm trying to remember what all the other ones were. I think, the standard issue, medical and utilities and so on and so forth. But interesting that they list the user and the people as a requirement for a smart city.
Yes, but it shouldn't be number 9, I don't think. Yeah, no, I talked to, what were they called? A smartivist or something, which may be the term we could change. But I had a conversation with Be Smart City earlier on. This must have been ages ago, but their take is definitely bring that smart citizen along the journey, and that's how we make smart communities. Anyway, okay, enough about me. Let's talk about you, and I want to know about and we've already started to talk about some of the projects and things you've been working on, but let's dive a bit deeper and tell us some of the things you've been working on, but also the challenges that you're seeing in this space as well.
Yeah, okay. Challenges, I suppose it's like anywhere. There's always challenges in sectors and projects, but for example, like we're doing one of those audit projects that I was talking about earlier, where we're actually going around and doing current state audits across Australia for a large organisation that has a lot of properties. And, we're just looking at their current environment before they do an IoT platform deployment. And some of the challenges for these guys are they don't know their current state, and this isn't a unique problem to them, but systems and buildings and environments that have been built in the recent past and not have any as-built documentation, no maintenance documentation, and for them to have to go to the expense of, going out and engaging a company like us just to understand their current state. And then on top of that, you've got users that are dealing from a facility side, that have been doing that for years and are now IP connected. So you talk about IoT devices. So, there's some funny things you find when you start going through these environments around connected devices. And I think we all know that cybersecurity is probably the number one on every IT manager's list at the moment. And you only have to look at the operational technology within a building to see that, the easiest way into any of these IT environments normally is through the OT networks. So that's certainly a challenge when we talk about in-building IoT deployments at the moment that we're really seeing, and having some fun doing some current state audits and finding some interesting things for numerous clients. So, I think that's probably one of the bigger ones. When we talk about municipalities and regions, I think some of their challenges are the same ones we've talked about for years. So it's, connectivity is a major issue regionally. We're starting to see some really cool projects stood up to try and help with that though, right? We've got Gig State, we've got QCN here in Queensland that are, doing some amazing things with fibre backhaul thanks to the government assets that are being brought together there. And QCN's working actively with the industry, to enable this and connect up the regions. And then within the regions now, we're seeing a lot of telecommunications companies, some startups, some that have been around for a few years, doing fairly large-scale deployments, to be honest, of fibre builds and interconnectivity. So, which is really cool to see, almost beating NBN to the punch in a lot of these places and offering really great service to regional locations, which is an enabler for so many other things. I spoke recently about this and the fact that we've now got a subsea broadband cable landing in the Sunshine Coast, right? That's unheard of that a council would have a project like that on their books at any point in time. Worldwide, it's never been done. So to enable that connectivity into Queensland, and then that then interconnects into the likes of Toowoomba, where we've got Pulse Data Centre, and they're doing some regional technology rollouts out there as well. Mackay, Bundaberg, all these regions that are now getting some real connectivity deployed can look to undertake much better projects in the smart city and IoT space.
Yeah, and that's really going back to the foundations again, isn't it?
Yeah.
And there is some really exciting things happening and I guess for tech people, they might be seen as kind of sexy projects, but for the everyday person, that ability to enable, I guess, the possibility of this connectivity is maybe not fully understood. And also there are so many use cases that we're not even thinking about or we don't know because it will, regional innovation will happen by necessity. And so there'll be all these pockets of things happening that we won't even know about until, somebody goes out there and, oh, wow, I didn't realize you were doing that. That's really cool. Or that's really helping someone or, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, there's some really cool projects around like that at the moment, right? Because if you were to talk to someone about automation, most people would think of mining or process-driven workflows. But at the moment, we're seeing automation move into ag tech, so farming, and there's a genuine requirement around connectivity when you go out and do automation in farming because there is latency-dependent devices. So having this connectivity enabled in the regions and someone actually process the data is the other big thing. In edge data centers have been a big talking point for some point in time. I've been involved in that space for some time, and it's another pet project area for me. And we're starting to see some companies in Australia really make some headway. They're actually really doing this now. It's finally happening. There's deployments happening. There's projects underway, and the interconnectivity between them is happening as well. So it's not an exciting thing for someone from the outside of our industry that doesn't understand technology because they don't it's hard to explain to someone the importance of a fibre optic infrastructure and data centre in a regional location, but what that enables for ag tech organisations to bring to those regions is really exciting. So really focusing on what that enables as opposed to what it actually is probably an important discussion.
Yes, and you picked up a really good point there. It's actually the outcomes. And so we need to start, and again, we're talking about use cases. I didn't mean to only talk about use cases or bring that word up a lot. But actually, what does this mean? And I think sometimes we get lost in explaining exactly what the technology is, but actually it's the application and the outcome and what does that mean for old mate down the road, for his farm, whatever. And I think this ag tech and farming, smart farming or whatever, I'm sure it was smart before we had the term smart. So much happening in that space. And actually, I've been meaning to get more people on the podcast to talk about that because I think they're not necessarily telling everybody about it. So, thank you for reminding me. I've written a note here to follow
Just
that up.
Google Connected Farms, I think they're called. Yes.
Connected Farms.
Yeah, some very cool stuff. And it's enabling other projects, right? Because when they go into these regions to do that, they're having drone companies come to them. And, these drone companies aren't just looking at farming, but they're looking at pest control and all these other problems that if we go back to the start of the conversation, what problem are we trying to fix here? So those guys couldn't fix that problem because they needed a certain technology layer that doesn't exist in those regions. So we're now seeing that being rectified and enabling these problems to be solved by technology.
And no, I totally agree. And there's actually lots happening here in Toowoomba, just thinking about all things. Anyway, again, enough about me. No, thanks so much for sharing that. And I think sharing some of those challenges is really valuable and really valuable to the audience as well, because, they'll be thinking about these things and how they can solve them. So, thanks so much. Let's move to the future, and keen to hear what your thoughts are on what are the emerging trends that people aren't talking about enough.
Emerging trends that people aren't talking about. Airing dirty laundry on about their current state, I suppose, is the big one people aren't talking about. I suppose that it's been the same concerns have been going on for some time, and you alluded to it before, Zoe, around data and privacy, I think is a big one. How do you manage that? We talk about technologies enabling other technologies and problem solving. So things like as simple as CCTV, where we've still got councils that are worried about deploying CCTV networks because of the liability on them and the risk. So really talking about that openly, I think, is important, and the advantages that it brings, but really, putting it out there to say, here are the risks involved, if any, and here's the liability, and here's the requirements on you if you're going to deploy this type of technology. But I think, like I said before, we're past a lot of the hype curve. I think a lot of that investigation has now happened, and we're seeing some real projects start to get stood up that are more aligned to the regional requirements and metro requirements, just depending on where the project is. But we've gotten past that stage of technology for technology's sake in most instances. We are starting to see some smarter investigations going on. We've worked with some consulting firms that work right at that front-end feasibility. The client basically knows they have a problem, but they don't know what the problem is. One of which was a council that came to us and said, look, we've got this offer from a company who is building a fibre optic, dark fibre network to connect up and take some capacity. And we just don't understand why we'd want to do that, but we think we should, but we don't know why. So, working with them to understand what this enables, again, our favourite word for the day, enables a use case, what that enables for them to be able to achieve and bring the technology platforms above that. So I think, they're the problems that, sort of flipping your question on its head a little bit, that we are talking about, but they haven't been talked about in the past. It's just admitting you don't know what you don't know.
I think when I do ask this question, I get a range of different answers. And I think it is about, in our industry, because there are so many things to talk about, right? Somebody is talking about it somewhere, but how do we bring that into, making real action in our projects and that type of thing? And I think the things you were talking about there are some of the challenges, and I think we'll see more and more of those, challenges being addressed, which is going to move us forward, which is really interesting. And, understanding that baseline as well. And I think not just for projects or not just for assets, but understanding a baseline so then we can actually measure and monitor when we have had an impact rather than just going on gut feel. We'll have the data. That's something I'm really passionate about, is really not just, I guess, and it's not technology for technology's sake even, but just after we know we've got a problem, then how are we going to measure and monitor that we've actually solved that problem? Or have we created another problem that we need to solve, or, vice versa, whatever.
Measurable impact.
Yes.
Yeah, I missed that earlier on. That's a really great point.
Thanks. Came up with it myself, in fact.
Patent pending.
Okay, I've just got two more questions, both fairly easy. The first one is, what are some of your favorite smart community resources? Now, when I ask this question, it doesn't have to be specifically, smart community related, but anything that you, I guess, take in. So people you follow, podcasts you listen to, et cetera, in this space that people might be interested in.
Yeah. So yourself, of course, Zoe.
Oh, thank you. I feel like people think that I wrote this question, so then I give some props, because a lot of people have been like, oh, well, I listen to your podcast. Yeah. Which I appreciate, but that is not why I wrote the question. It's because I want to get all the bits from everybody else.
Yeah, right. Fair enough. Podcasts, obviously. Although, to be honest with you, Zoe, I haven't listened to as much podcasts. I think we discussed this the other day. Me too. Yeah, it dropped off where I thought it'd actually go up during COVID and being home a lot more. But my intake of that style of knowledge absorption did wane off it, and it's starting to come back now. I'm traveling a bit more, so I'm in the car a bit more. I'm listening to more podcasts. But I probably handle this a little bit differently. I do spend a fair bit of time in vendor land, so talking to manufacturers of products, softwares, and technologies, particularly some of the bigger guys, but also dealing with some of the really, the real specialist niche solutions providers out there, because I find that they're the guys that are trying to fix a problem. They're out there building a product, but they wouldn't be normally you wouldn't be building a product or a solution if there wasn't a problem, right? So speaking to them is a big part of what I do to keep up to date with what's happening in the smart city space and what's coming, what's the art of the possible, right, again. So, yeah, that's a big part of what I like to do, to stay informed with what technologies are actually being built and developed in the background, because normally they've built that to solve a problem for someone else. The other is spending time with the likes of councils and government and talking to them about what they're doing, what problems are they solving, where are they seeing the shifts coming, and where do they see the future for them? Because obviously in councils, they've usually got a fairly decent roadmap, and that's, I'm going to be honest, that's what I love about dealing with councils, right? And if I pull the Sunshine Coast card again, to go to meetings with the Mayor, Mark Jamieson up here, and just see him roll out his A1 business card that shows all the infrastructure projects for the region. It's a proud little moment when he does that. I have to admit, I really do like it. It talks to a 25-year vision and beyond, right? Whereas that sort of vision maybe doesn't come at state level. There's a bit more short-term thinking. So seeing that from the grassroots up is fantastic, and actually working with councils to say, you know, what is your 25-year vision? What does that look like? And what's the roadmap to get there? Because, you know, you've got this current state of where we currently are, and you've got this future or target state that you want to achieve. What does that transition look like? So that's probably where I get most of my information.
I love talking to councils and state government. And I don't mean that because I want to work with them, but just, you know, even on the podcast, like the listens go up when I talk to councils, because people are so interested about what they're doing. And because I'm talking to councils that, you know, are trying to move forward in this space, and whether they're going fast or slow, it doesn't really matter too much. They're going the pace that they need to go. But yeah, I get a little spike in the listens when I have councils on, because, you know, people are interested in that stuff, and it affects us all as well. What are we? Professionals in smart community space. We're community members of our own local councils, right?
Exactly.
So of course we're going to be interested. Yes.
I believe that about your councils, because, you know, the other part that I didn't mention here was webinars, you know, and there's been a huge increase in webinars, and there's been some really cool technology changes. I think we discussed this the other week as well, around how people run webinars and the networking drinks afterwards. You know, there's some really cool concepts there that I think you worked on. Yeah, so that's another one. I have to admit, whenever you see someone from a council talking, that's the one you tune into, right? Because you want to know what's their problem, what are they trying to achieve, and how did they fix it? Because normally they're talking about how they've created a solution to a problem again. So, yeah, it's definitely speaking to the actual people that are trying to solve these problems and build out these initiatives. It's, yeah, like you said, it's always interesting.
I feel like we could talk for ages. And lastly, I have one more question, but before that, I guess I'm really excited that you've decided to come on as a podcast sponsor for the month of November. So we are very excited to have you, and I'm excited that this episode is going to kick off our sponsored month of November of 2020. Yeah, so yeah, welcome aboard, and we're really excited to have you.
Yeah, thanks, Zoe. I'm really excited as well. You know, this has been a really cool journey and great to be part of, and great to see the podcast just go from strength to strength. So to be part of that is awesome. Yeah, really looking forward to it.
And yeah, I look forward to building out the next few episodes as well, and curating that in partnership with you, as well as I guess we're going to have many more conversations, because I feel like we could talk for a long time. And maybe, because we're both in Queensland, we could even catch up for a coffee at some point.
Yeah, just rubbing it into the poor Melbournians, are you?
Oh, sorry. Hopefully by the time this is out, we'll see some easing of restrictions. But yes, thank you for coming on. Now, last question, very important. How can people connect with you?
Easiest way, go to the website, tplconnect.com.au, or shoot me an email, adam.davis@tplconnect.com.au.
Excellent. We'll put all the links in the show notes, and people will have those links on all of our episodes for November. So they should be able to find you. And yeah, again, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast, and looking forward to our next conversation.
Me too. Thanks, Zoe.
Thanks, Adam. Talk soon. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to the Smart Community Podcast. Show notes for this episode and all other episodes are available on our website, mysmart.community/podcast. If you have any questions for us or any of our guests, you can email hello@mysmart.community. You can also find us on the socials. We are on LinkedIn and Twitter @SmartComHQ. That's com with 2 M's. If you are enjoying the podcast, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we would love for you to leave us a rating and review at wherever you listen. This really helps us reach more ears and eyes, so thank you for your support. As always, we hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.